In this lesson, we're going to take a look at using targets to compile your code differently dependent on your environment. Up until this point, really all we've done is work in our analytics dev environment. We're building out our project and deploying just there. But if we recall back to the viewpoint, analytics platforms should have multiple environments, and that's likely the case wherever you would be working with DBT. So how do we handle this? Here in the project, I've opened back up the profiles.yaml because this is going to be critical. If you remember back when we set this up, we talked about how you can do that debug and change the target by dev and prod, and by default it's dev. That's why every time we've run, we haven't had to specify dev because it just is the default because we've set it here. But now we want to work with production. So how would we do that? Well, the short answer is basically you would just add the target flag. So you would do a dbt run -- target prod, or if you had another account, maybe a UAT or a test, you just pick the target. So for example, if we look at run, let's say, if we look at any of these, we could do this one here. We can see it's not only deploying to analytics dev, but it also knows to select from analytics dev because that's the context for which this was run. Now, if we do a dbt compile target prod, it should update. It's not going to change this one. Let's actually look at just the compiled, because remember, compiled won't have the create, but just take my word for it here. If we do this compile, we should see this change. It should actually change in real time. And here we can see it did. So by changing the target to prod, it changed all of these references to prod. And that's, again, why it's really important to use the ref function, to use these Jinja functions rather than hard coding this into your query, because this is compiled from that ref. And then by keeping it that way, it allows all these other functions and features to work seamlessly together. So, okay, that's nice. It'll obviously compile. If we were to run it, it's going to both deploy and select everything from the proper environment. But there's more that we can do here. Another example of using targets, if we look at the documentation, is to limit data within maybe a certain environment. You can create a Jinja condition, let's say an if condition, to say if the target is one thing, add this line of code, and then end it, and you can get as complicated as you want. Remember, DBT is just compiling your code, and essentially, if this condition is true, it'll drop in this code and compile it that way. If not, it'll leave it out. You could do the same in some of your YAML files for selecting. So in our case, remember, we have that raw dev, and we also have raw, which is our production data. And what we can do here is also tie the source that will be used dependent on the target. So they're using raw dev here as well. And we could say, instead of raw prod, just raw, and it will compile our select statements from the source Jinja based on this. So let's add this to our project and see how all this works, and then run it.